Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies increase capacity by providing the needed clarity in strategy, people, process, and technology so that these companies can avoid the valley of death and really bring their life-saving technology to market. The primary organizations that I work with are pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, and biotech companies. And so, I just really am looking forward to also bringing in my guest this week. So this week on the Life Science Success Podcast, my guest is Thomas Farb-Horch. Thomas is the CEO of Thrive Bio. He's been involved in founding 18 pharmaceutical, biotech, medtech, software, and AI companies, 5 of which have been unicorns. So with that, welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. I appreciate your inviting me. And the best part has been listening to other people's podcasts and seeing some commonality and some people who are potential customers. And you have a network within your podcast guests.
Yeah, it's been a great journey for me. So I started this during COVID, primarily because here I am sitting as a consultant and I'm thinking, how do I stay linked to people like you? How do I know what it is that you're doing, and how do I sort of make sure that I stay involved in the industry? And for me, it's just been a great way to connect and sort of give back to the industry a lot as well. So that hopefully I can shine the spotlight a lot more on you through this platform and through the audience and other things. So yeah, I really appreciate you being here and being a guest. And as I told Sal previously in one of the episodes, I have been sort of wanting to have you on for a while because I'm really somebody that's admired the company and Thrive and the technology that you're working on for a while.
Well, thank you, Don. It's very gratifying. You just keep working and working, and I tend to be so focused on what I'm working on. I don't always know people notice it. And yes, we were introduced by Sal Buscemi, who is my most recent investor. He have had to raise most of our funds through family offices because Thrive, like many of my companies, are doing things that other people haven't done, and the venture guys are a little scared of that. So family offices have filled that, and Sal has been a fantastic investor. $2.75 million from HRN and Sal's co-investors.
That's a great sort of a great testament to the work that family offices can do in terms of helping us as well. And I mean, to be honest, and I know we're going to dive into this more, but I thought that maybe the journey for funding would be a lot easier for somebody who's founded 18 different companies in our space and then also had 5 unicorns. So your lottery ticket is a big one.
I know. It's always difficult for me, and I've made investors many hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars it's actually 7 unicorns with the exits. And you would think that, gee, just give me a % or 2 of what I made you, but it doesn't work that way. And one of the things that many entrepreneurs are not as conscious of as they should be is when they're raising money, what is going on in that fund? Most entrepreneurs don't put themselves in those shoes. I'm lucky I've been on the investing side, and everybody should be on the other side of whatever they do. It's just a great experience. And one of the most important things one can do is really, I think in general, learn to put yourself in the other person's shoes. That venture investor has objectives and pressures and processes, and very few entrepreneurs are aware of it. It tends to be very rigorous, very siloed. So because the things I do cross silos, cross many fields, we don't fit into some of those boxes that the venture capitalists have. The family offices don't think that way. And so our largest family office is the Estee Lauder family. They invested in some of my previous companies. Sal brought in some fantastic family offices. He has what's called a multifamily office. They're fulfilling an important role that angels used to.
Yeah.
But angels have changed. They've gone from have lunch with somebody from the industry, and that meal, or the next day they say, I'll put in 100,000, I'll put in 250. They've aggregated into these angel groups, and these groups can be tremendously beneficial. I have 7 angel groups, so I've been successful, but it's a process. It's a long process. Um, it's a group process, so that rather than having those 200 members who you could go to, have lunch with, and get a yes or a no, you get one big no or one big yes. I've
Right.
gotten only yeses, so it's great. But when you're raising money, uh, you like to have a lot of shots on goal. And if one says no, keep it nice and quiet, because it was just that individual. But these angel groups are big networks, and they talk to each other. So it's changed, and it's become, in some ways, some of them have forgotten what they were, and they've become less entrepreneurial. And the family offices are the most entrepreneurial, oftentimes because that person was in business. Uh, they are refreshing. They
Mm.
rarely ever ask who else is in the deal,
Hmm.
and they'll make most of the family offices I have. I have the Parker brother family from Monopoly. They sold their company to General Mills and invest a lot in life sciences. Um, so I'm spending Monopoly money,
Nice.
actually. Um, I loved that game as a kid.
Right.
But these family offices are often very sophisticated. The Louders, the Milsteins, real estate family in New York, Sal Buscemi's, some of their family offices are really experienced investors, and they make their own decisions. They don't care what others think. They'll
Mm.
come to their own determination, and they're not following the crowd, which for many of the institutional funds, there's safety in being in
Yeah.
that crowd.
Right. Well, very good. I appreciate, the background in terms of funding, as well, because I know that a lot of the companies that, that have founders that listen to the show as well, um, benefit from hearing other people's journey, because this show was kind of founded in the idea that, life science success really happens through a large group of people. It's not one individual that does all the work.
Sure.
It's, a broad community, and the broader our community, the better that it gets. But I'd also like to dive a little bit more into what led you on this journey to want to found all of these companies and go through this process multiple times. It's painful enough doing it once. I can only imagine, doing it 18 different times, and then, also having the success that you have as well probably puts additional stress on you, um, in it. So what sort of led you to this journey? And then, um, what sort of keeps you going?
So I like talking to you because you make me think about these things, and you can spend your whole day sending emails, et cetera, and not not think of these things. So I think there are personality types that are curious, that want to see change, that see that things can be better, and are not afraid to put themselves at risk. So there's certainly a certain kind of personality which I do have, and even though I've made billions of dollars for my investors, there is a caring about people
Mm-hmm.
that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have, and a desire to change the world and make the world a better place. I One of my second company that I started, and my first unicorn, is a company that the software to this day is used by Fair Isaac, and monitors 90% of all credit cards and debit cards today. That was my company, H&C Software, that I co-founded, and we went public. We were acquired. Oracle bought one division for $1 billion. Fair Isaac bought the main company, and the only time I get a rest or really a chance to think, I'd say when I have an interview with somebody like you, or between jobs, and I realized that H&C software, we basically, I help make rich people richer. I help make the banks richer, make better credit decisions. Now it does help people in many ways, but it makes a certain group of people wealthy. And I decided I wanted to make everyone wealthy. I wanted to find ways to distribute the wealth, not just to the wealthy. And life sciences was my next area. And I combined, HNC was an AI company. We never talked about it, but we used neural networks to monitor fraud and find it. And so my third company, one after HNC, was a machine vision company, an AI company combined with life sciences. And we were automating cytology labs. Cytology labs read pap smears. Pap smears are the world's most widely given primary screening test. And until Cytic, maybe the least reliable of all the primary screening tests. That was why women would have pap smears every year, because you had to keep taking it because it was only 65% accurate. At Cytic, we made it 95% accurate. We changed the course of cervical cancer. We saved lives. Women didn't have to have pap smears every year. We really made a difference. And it was a problem that everyone said to us, you'll never succeed. You'll never change the way physicians and nurses conduct a test that is 65 years old, been done the same way. And when I hear things like that, Don, that gets me really interested. And when people say you can't do something, that triggers my interest. The reason is, if they're saying that, or similar things like there's no solution, or it's always been done that way, people will never change, it means they've stopped thinking.
Mm-hmm.
People are not thinking about pap smears because it's been done that way for 65 years and nobody's going to change it. But we completely changed it. And I can't tell you the number of investors who just say no, you'll never succeed. And I guess part of the personality type is wanting to take on that kind of a challenge and go where no person's gone before. So the theme in my career has been crossing lots of functions, lots of jobs, lots of industries, and taking the best from each. And when you have that perspective, it's very powerful, as opposed to someone who stays, say, in devices their whole life, or diagnostics. You get to see how other thinkers, other industries have solved some of the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love taking on that challenge. And generally, I find the big problems are not solved with just one approach.
Sure.
It often, I think one of the things that I've learned is that if you're going to solve a problem, you actually have to make sure you are solving the entire problem. If you're going to try and reduce hospital costs,
Mm-hmm.
and you only do one thing, but you're dependent on many other things happening, you're not going to succeed.
Right.
And so one of the things that I've learned is you have to define the whole problem. If you're going to say you're solving this $1 billion problem, and you'll be $1 billion company, but you're only solving one of 10 things that need to be solved, you're not going to succeed. And so many companies fall into this trap. I have too. my current company, Thrive, we really step back and look at, we call them pillars. What are the 7 pillars that are needed to solve this problem? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to solve them.
Right.
Sometimes it's making sure they are solved by somebody or a collaborator, but you can't fool yourself into thinking you're going to solve a big problem and you're only addressing a tiny fraction. So
Yeah,
many business plans do that, though.
in a lot of the work that I do, one of the ways that we refer to that is squishing the balloon. If you think of like anytime that you squish one side of a balloon, the other side sort of pops
Yeah,
out. It's like, we would always
that's right.
say, relate to people and say, look, fixing the problem here and forcing the problem downstream or upstream doesn't really solve the problem. So let's figure out how to solve it and get things going again. I see that my camera's frozen. I'm going to reset it here and it'll be back in just 1 second. But yeah, so we could keep going. The next question I had for you though is in terms of your career, right? So you've said 7 different unicorns. Were they all in one particular industry or in different industries?
So they were all over, in line with my desire to solve problems with different techniques, and understand how different groups solve those problems. So they are in 3 are in AI. We never actually in any of them talked about it, but we utilized it, and it is incredibly powerful. And we're doing that at Thrive. One was a real estate investment trust, and the rest were life sciences, and they include diagnostics, devices, pharmaceuticals, and Thrive is a research tools company. And it is remarkable how some of those problems that are common across businesses are approached so differently.
Oh, sure.
I lived in China. I ran a venture fund started and ran a venture fund in China, and it's tremendously valuable. I listened to some of the podcasts of previous guests, and the international experience is often cited as just incredibly important. It's similar to traveling abroad to a device company, or a diagnostic company or a pharma. I mean, pharma does marketing completely different than devices. Do those people ever talk to each other? No.
Not, no, not as far as I could tell. No.
I mean, sure, there's a little bit, but it's very, very siloed. But you look at marketing in devices. So one of the things that I did, that's an example of this kind of cross functionality, is I was running a specialty pharmaceutical company in urology and endocrinology, and I acquired a device company in urology and endocrinology. We were public, and that company was public, because it didn't make sense to me that, say, a urologist would have to talk to one person for one kind of a solution, maybe even for the same indication for the same problem, then if it's a device, talk to someone else. And you look at marketing in pharma, a lot of it's called detailing. You're lucky if you have a few minutes time with the doctor.
Right.
It's gold if you got 2 minutes with the doctor. But in devices, you might go into surgery with them. I mean, you spend hours. So imagine it for a pharmaceutical. Not all of the reps that were pharma reps were able to get this, but those who did described it as like the movie changing from black and white to color.
Yeah.
That for the first time, they had a consultative relationship because of the device, and they could then bring their therapeutics into it. That's an example, incredibly powerful. By all benchmarks, we had one of the most productive sales forces, and it all changed when we actually merged for the first time. I think I know of 1 or 2 other examples, and there was this cross pollination of ideas that just normally doesn't take place. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been in device diagnostics, pharma, and seen these different things and thought, well, gee, they have a better solution in devices. They have a consultative relationship. That's a better way to sell than bringing a pizza to the receptionist.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, even that's limited anymore in terms of the
Yes,
ways that they can do it and everything else with the Sunshine
that's
Act.
right.
Now it's just,
That's right.
amazing, the limitations that have been put on them. I do want to take some time though, too, to dive a little bit into Thrive in terms of, what is Thrive? What are you creating there? And, yeah, who are you working with and who are your customers?
So, at one of the companies that I just mentioned, Cytic, we automated cytology labs, which were buying microscopes and benches and spending days, all day reading hundreds, thousands of slides, looking for that needle in a haystack, looking for a cell that showed a precancerous or cancerous morphology. Well, I found another Cytic, and it's cell culture labs. Cell culture is fundamental. It's key to biomedical research. Almost everything is based on the cell. And yet, cell culture is done. Remember, I talked about pap smears the same way for
Yep.
65 years?
Right.
It's been done the same way for 70 years, almost exactly the same. The first cell line factory was actually, unfortunately, Henrietta Lacks cells, HeLa cells. Um, and there's minimal data, minimal automation. And why is this important? So I always have to have a vision. If I can't find that vision or I don't have that vision, I'm not going to be interested in the company or in solving that problem. It has to be doing something bigger, better. And that vision is important in rallying employees and investors. And the vision that we have at Thrive is to improve the incredibly low chances of therapeutics getting from bench to patient. As you know, the odds are better in Las Vegas by a
Right.
lot,
By a lot. Yeah.
versus drug discovery. And I was between companies, between unicorns, and was looking around. And I find reading a lot is really important. I read an incredible article in 2013 that Amgen put out. And for 10 years, they had between 10 and 100 scientists trying to reproduce 53 landmark oncology studies, published, peer reviewed, really important papers. They were able to reproduce 6. Study after study has shown at best groups were able to reproduce 50%. That means that there's about $60 billion a year spent in the United States, private and public sector, on preclinical research and development. And at least half to 90% of that is not valid. If you can't reproduce, it's not science. And so this is called the reproducibility crisis. And I read that and I said, my God, this is incredible. And why? And so I did some more reading, and it turns out cell culture is responsible for about half of the problems in preclinical research. Well, this really affects the odds. Now, what's going on? Well, we take these cells, we know very little about them. Everything's labeled manually. We put them in these incubators. We take them out. We're not monitoring them while they're in there. We move them across multiple environments. We look at them under a microscope. Actually, most researchers spend 2-3 hours a day. They take the plate, and there's no data. Everything's gone. They'll occasionally take some scans or some images, but even those images are nothing like what we provide at Thrive, which is really a far better microscope. We take gigabytes, nobody's ever done this, gigabytes in minutes at 100 focal planes, and we can track a single cell over time, and we record everything. Because that researcher might have taken a digital photograph of something that he or she thought was important, but that is what people in AI know is biased data. You want the complete data set. And biology is not flat. Cells
Right.
are three-dimensional tissues. One of
Yeah.
the most exciting areas is organoids, 3D cell structures. You've had a couple of podcast guests on this area. And the reason this is so important, the cell culture is part of, it's ubiquitous. But most of it is called adherent cells sitting on the bottom of the plate, as opposed to something that's closer to an organ, to us,
Right.
a better patient model, and those are organoids. Well, we can, with our 100 focal planes, at least 100 focal planes, 2 to 50 microns apart, we can take images better than others, far better than others. And so, and we're taking everything, every cell in every well, in every plate, and we're making the data comparable. If you have background in AI, your antenna is probably going up that what we're doing, we don't really necessarily talk about it, but what we're doing is making sure there's enough data and the right data. And that means there's unbiased data, it's comparable data over time, which we spend a lot of computing power to make sure that each image set from a different lab, from the same lab, of the same cells, you can actually compare them and you can collect lots of data on them. And it's good data, it's clean. So, what we're doing is really a kind of what the microscope company should have done. In order to solve that problem, you have to control the environment. Remember, I said these plates are moving across multiple environments. You can see the cells are shocked. They almost immediately are emitting shock proteins. They're stressed. The ones that survive in a lab are completely different than what survive in our body, and they drift. They genomically drift and get farther and farther. The amazing thing is, just because it's all manual and doesn't use things like barcodes, which we do,
Right.
is there's 30% mislabeling. It's incredible. I should say it's 11% to 30% mislabeling. At best, 11% was found in an NIH study of many labs. That sounds extraordinary, and it is. I mean, well, no wonder we have trouble
Right.
getting drugs
Tying
from Benson.
stuff back.
We're screening what we think are liver cells, but they're kidney cells.
Sure.
I mean, that is literally what is happening in our labs, 11% to 30%. That's just one kind of mistake. There's the stress, there's the not taking enough images, there's huge inefficiencies of running an experiment and not knowing why the experiment worked or not worked, because you can't go back and look at anything. We collect data on everything, and we're producing these large comparable data sets that make better cells, because we have a saying, good science needs good cells. Because right now, Uber knows more about us than average scientist knows about their cells. They go into that incubator, they take them, they run billions of dollars of assays on these cells of poor quality, limited information, and highly variable. So they get different answers because they're starting with a highly variable set. There are so many things wrong with this. It's amazing that it wasn't addressed. This is a kind of problem I like to find, which is a completely undigitized, incredibly important area, which is affecting our ability to study cells, run experiments on cells, bring cell therapeutics to the market.
And you think
So
about
that's
you think about the cross. I mean, I think about all of the intersections of the things that you just talked about, right? So, I mean, I'm going to use a couple simple examples because I'm kind of a simple guy. So where my mind instantly goes is back whenever, COVID had happened. All of these brilliant scientists that, I was fortunate to sort of bump into a few of, and get to talk to even a few that were working on therapies. And, they had said, look, we have we have knowledge already about spike proteins, but the reality is we haven't translated that knowledge to COVID. So we have to do that, and then we have to come up with a vaccine fast. And whenever I think about what you guys are coming up with, essentially is like a way to collect all of this information and make it usable, kind of translatable across these different platforms. Again, I mean, I was just listening to the Charles River podcast. So Charles River has their own podcast called Vital Signs. And they were emphasizing in this podcast the importance of organoids and the importance of moving away from animal models. And so they go through this whole entire podcast talking about that. And, to your point, what if you could, even in animal models, in tissue that you've collected from animals or in organoids, if you could collect all of that data, and now all of a sudden, whenever you're having to look back across and say, well, did I have some information before in something else that I studied that
Right,
now I can leverage? That's where I see the power in Thrive. I mean, that's my simple sort of
No,
analogy
that's
for it.
great. We're creating databases where there were no databases. And the thing about databases is their value expands
Mm,
the more data it has,
yeah.
because it becomes more and more something that you can consult, that you can mine. Um, and we view it as there are three main reasons for why our customers should have these databases that they've really never had in cell biology. And our customers, by the way, on average, are generating several terabytes a week.
Wow.
I mean, this is way beyond what sequencing the human genome is. I mean, this is just extraordinary amounts of data. And my co-founder came out of genomics, made some of the first sequencers with Lee Hood, was in genomics for 25 years. And we visited together a cell culture lab. We're both shocked. And from his perspective, he said, my God, I've been spending 25 years generating huge amounts of data, what we thought were huge amounts. And it was at the time. And these data sets transformed genomics. Genomics without sequencing is a very different field. Well, we're going to transform cell biology. We're going to bring that kind of just huge data sets that are tremendously valuable, that have not been collected. And those data sets are valuable for, first of all, making better cells. Remember, I talked about the quality of cells, their stress, their drift, their mislabeled. Well, part of what we're doing is automation. We're automating the process. We're using setup tools, documentation tools, so that you can go back and look. Number two, and that's actually how we started the company, was good science needs good cells. But then we realized all this data, all these images we're taking to improve cell culture are incredibly valuable to researchers. They can see things that they never saw before. They can make faster decisions. We're transforming the viral plaque assay, which is the standard way of studying viruses. And you wait 1, 2, or 3 weeks and you stain it. You don't have any information before. You stain the effect of the virus on the cells. You count the plaques or holes, but you've stained them, so you can't see how they evolve. We can follow those plaques from day 2 instead of waiting to day 28. And using AI, we have a customer that day 3, 4 can see what those plaques are. It doesn't have to wait 14, 21 days. Data has transformed so many other fields. Automation has. Nobody's done that in cell biology, and yet it all comes down to the cell.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Tom, what is the greatest leadership lesson that you've ever learned?
It's a long list, but I think an important lesson is that we may be buffeted by these external problems, just incredible problems, and we may be focused on its competition, or I don't have enough resources. And what I've learned, actually, the more difficult the company or the situation has been, and all of my unicorns have died at least thrice, almost died at least thrice. It could have died. I mean, sometimes it was just tenacity of myself and others. The answer to those problems is often within. It is generally within. It could be you can answer that problem right in that chair, and it because it's about your attitude. It's about how you approach that problem. You know, so many people. I'm fascinated by prepositions. They're very short words, but have huge meaning. So I always try to look at things from, oh, that terrible thing happened to me, in a different way. That thing, terrible thing happened for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to be humble. I try to ask for help. I try to learn. The smartest people I know act dumb and ask questions, seek help. The dumbest people I know spend their time acting smart. So, how you approach that problem, um, not having balance is very hard. For example, I think one of the greatest phrases is know when to hold them, know when to fold them. Um,
Back to Kenny
you know,
Rogers.
right. I mean, okay, maybe I'm not succeeding because I'm not tenacious enough. I got to just keep going, keep going. Well, maybe, but maybe not.
Mm.
And so the trick is balance. And I find having balance is often how you approach the problem. Not one of the things I've learned is fear is a terrible advisor. You know, don't react out of fear. Um, and not every red flag is the same size.
Right.
You have to really think about things, approach the problem, be balanced. And if you're not, even if there is a good answer out there, you're not going to get there. So it all kind of comes down to it's really all about us
Mm.
and how we approach it.
I like that quote
And
though. Not every red flag is the same size. That's it's an important
it is.
takeaway. I think for me as well, walking away
It
walking away
is.
from this particular podcast.
And some of that has to do with prioritization. You don't have a lot of resources. You have to make a lot of decisions quickly. And a lot of people will focus and get all spun up on the wrong things.
So easy to do. Well, there are
It
three
is.
questions that I like to ask every guest, Tom. What inspires you?
Um, balance. So people who are balanced. I have amazed by people who can work hard but also say yes to themselves.
Mm.
And uh, I am I'm inspired by people. I'm inspired by people who know history. It always amazes me, but are not condemned to act a certain way by history. When I was living in China, the CEO of a very large successful company, Wuxi AppTech, then it was Wuxi FarmTech, who I invested in, and the CEO asked me once, "How come you Americans don't know your history?" Which is true
True.
compared, and it bothered me for years. And years later, I called him up when I figured it out, which is that we are very forward looking. Ideally, you're balanced and you know your history. I said, I once said, actually, my first company, I asked the venture capitalist, because I was 23, I asked, why did you give us $5 million? And he said, I made the decision the day when I asked you, why wasn't IBM able to succeed in developing the program you guys were developing, which structured COBOL? And you, being me, answered something like, I don't care that IBM didn't do it. We're smarter, we're working harder, we're taking a completely different approach. I cringed when I heard that I remembered I had said those things. It seemed so pompous, but um, a lot of people never went to solve that problem because IBM tried for 20 years and was unable to. And so they stopped thinking. And so you can't let the history overly determine kind of your past. So I'm in awe of people who know their history, they apply it, just so well.
Yeah, and apply it in a way that they can advance their thinking and their thoughts in an innovative way is what I'm taking away from what you said. So thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
Um, Divisiveness, um, duality, false dualities, polarization, and I just said a few minutes ago how I love prepositions. I'm fascinated by them because they're so short, yet they can completely change the way you think about things. And so often, um, I find that people are talking about it's this or that. Substitute and for or. So often, it is not one or the other, it's and. Unfortunately, there's a lot of divisiveness, there's a lot of divisions. I think ultimately, the concern that I have is the lack of equality of opportunity, the lack of equality of education access, lack of equality of health.
Mm.
And I think those things explain a huge amount of, of the problems in the world. And so to me, there's nothing as important as opportunity, education, and health. And it'll make the world so much better place. Think of all the Einsteins. I'm always fascinated by this thought. I mean, we know that geniuses occur at a certain percentage. There are millions of people who will never know any of the geniuses that were there, and they may have had the answer to one of our biggest problems. But the world is believe in science, non-believers in science, we versus they. That concerns me.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a something that I think everybody could take away from that as well. And it was interesting. I heard an interview the other day with Trevor Noah. So Trevor Noah,
Yeah, love him.
yeah. So he's African originally, right? And then he
Right.
comes to America. And so he was placed in an all white school at some point in his history, and he asked, could I be moved to the other school? And they said no, because all of the lower education happens in this other school. All of, essentially you won't be what you could possibly be if you go to that other school. He forces himself to be transferred from one place to the other. Somehow, that happens, and he still becomes who he becomes, right? So he's like, so I went to the all black school and I am a success. So, it's not the school, it's the, kind of, what you want to be and what you can be as well. And I took a lot out of that interview. I thought it was really impactful, but at the same time, what you're saying is true. I mean, there's a lot of people that are disadvantaged just because of where they are, who they are. And that's a tough place to be in terms of decisiveness as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last question. What excites you?
Well, I think we've talked about a lot of the things that excite me. Solving big problems that people are ignoring, don't think are solvable. The pap smear was a big problem, world's most widely given primary screening test. And there was a solution, but it was ignored. Finding those big problems and finding that solution and changing the world. And not every product's going to be that, not every company, but um, I would have been happy if I had one unicorn, because in each of them we solved a big a big problem. After the first one that just made banks wealthier, all the others have changed the world, made it a better place, made many people wealthy. That and others weren't looking; it was ignored. Venture capitalists didn't want to invest in that, in that area, and so you're taking on a lot of work when you do that. You going into it, you're you don't fit into any of those silos,
Mm-hmm.
into any of those criteria for invest. You're going to have to work twice as hard at everything. But in every one of these companies, Thrive, we have an amazing group. They're inspired. Some of them are inspired by Several are by family members or friends who died from cancer. And we're having an impact on that. Um, it's um, that excites me.
Well,
Change the
thank you.
world,
Go ahead, finish. Sorry.
changing the world, and doing it in an area everybody thought you couldn't.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming and sharing on the Life Science Success podcast everything about Thrive and what you're working on. I'm certainly excited as well to see what the future is of this company and all the data that you produce and the usability of that data in the background, right? The research that we do is so critical to the future of where we're going. And as much as people want to point to AI, the data and the base science is really where it starts. So, I look forward to the future of what AI can deliver, but I know that the machine has to be fed something that's useful to it.
That's
And
right.
so I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And thanks a lot for coming on the podcast and sharing it with everybody else.
Thank you, Don. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed listening to the other podcasts, and I'm going to keep listening. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.